Trinity Sunday. Where should I begin? I thought I might start in the beginning and work my way through, right the way through the Bible to the very end, and show you every point and place where God expresses the being of God in one way or another. For the first 300 years of Christian teaching, I guess the most problematic of all of the doctrines of the church was the doctrine of the Trinity. In one way or another, whether it be through the divinity of Christ, whether it be through the separate nature of the Spirit, the early church for 300 years battled these things out until they decided one day, 300 years after the death of Christ, to have a great big consultation amongst the bishop and have a vote on what they believed and how they believed. That is the truth of it. That's how we get the doctrine of the Trinity. Jesus himself speaks in different and varied ways about God, the Father, the relationship that he sees he has with God, and the coming of the Spirit. And nowhere is that more evident than in the Gospel of John, which we read today. This takes me back around about 40 years, or nearly 40 years ago, when I entered into Bible college myself. For those of us who've had the privilege and the joy and the honour of going to some kind of theological college, you will know one of the first things they want to do is set you straight and teach you the doctrines of the church and teach us what we believe and how we should believe it. And so it was that back those years ago that I fearfully went into my first systematic theological class. Systematic theology is where they teach you one bit and they build upon it bit by bit. And you, at the end of it, you are an expert in theology. Well, so we like to think, us ministers. But I went around and I learnt the doctrines of the church, only to find out if I went to a different college, I might learn different doctrines from that, especially in the issues of baptism and all of those things. Yes, you will know that we have clear differences in the way and how we believe. And to say what is the biblical doctrine of the Trinity is very hard, because there are so many different things that produce themselves as we go through the Bible. So many different ways in which God is portrayed. Right back from the time of Moses, who says, well, God, you've sent me to go and free the Israelis. I've got to front up to the Pharaoh. Who am I going to say sent me? And he says, I am who I am. So I figure that means that even God himself or herself has a bit of conflicted nature in the way to describe who God is. Can anyone here today describe God to me? Be really good, wouldn't it? I can probably say more about what I believe God isn't than what I believe God is. Going from the negative, God isn't hatred, God isn't in that war situation that we see. We can say and proclaim what God isn't, often much easier than we proclaim what God is. Do you understand what I'm saying by that? We can sort of, from a negative point of view, say, well, that's not God. But to say what God is very difficult. Where did the Spirit come in? Last week, I should say, we celebrated Pentecost Sunday, where the Spirit's come. But in the Old Testament, we read constantly that the Spirit of God dwells and inhabits different places. The tabernacle, within the wilderness. Where does this start? Where does it finish? I don't know about you, but I want to be a good biblical Christian. I want to be someone who believes in the Bible. But you know what? That sometimes goes against the dogma and the dogmatics that we've been taught. But I'm firmly of the belief that dogma and dogmatics are not the things that bring people to faith. They're not the things that help people to understand the nature and the being of God. They are not the things that will improve our work. In fact, so often dogma and doctrine has been used to divide and separate those of faith. We define ourselves by what we're not. We're not one of those Catholics. We're not, the Baptist. We wouldn't want to be one of them, would we? And I can say that quite easily because my wife's a Baptist. was a Baptist. Isn't it true? We define ourselves against people because of our doctrine and our dogma. Instead of that, perhaps we could look at Trinity in the sense of today's understanding and doctrine as being one of relationship. The relationship that is in God. God is many. God is, in the Old Testament, the El Shaddai, the many-breasted one who wants to gather people. In the New Testament, God is different things. Jesus says words like, I am the good shepherd, and relating that sense of a good shepherd. So we see God in terms as a good shepherd in the church today, and we have a Good Shepherd Sunday, don't we? We see God as many things and in many places. We see God, dare I say it, within one another. What can I say definitively about God today? About God, Father, Son and Holy Spirit? Well, I'm not prepared to enter into the mathematics of spirituality. What I am prepared to say is that my understanding and the teaching that I get from the Bible is God is love. And that's far more important than doing some kind of linguistic or mathematical formula, isn't it? To understand God, not as a formula, not as a doctrine, but understanding God as one who is in relationship and one who offers love, not only within the unit of God, but within ourselves. I got to say, I want to be loved. Sounds like the Queen song, doesn't it? I want to be loved. Oh, no, that's free. Sorry. I want to be loved. I listen to the radio. So many songs are about people wanting love in their life, because love gives us meaning, doesn't it? Love gives us a reason to be loved and to love one another. I think Jesus might have even said something like that somewhere along the line. When I was thinking about Trinity, the trouble when you've been sick and you're told to put your feet up is you get far too much time to think. And that's been my week. I've had a lot of time to think about all kinds of things. And I started to discover what's called fractoid mathematics. Have you ever heard of fractoid mathematics? Well, where would you think we would get the word fractoid from? Fraction, thank you. That you can break every number into a fraction. And it was saying that 1 is no longer 1. That 1 and 1 no longer equals 2. This was quite radical thinking for me, because when I went to school, if you said anything other than 1 and 1 is 2, you'd get it wrong. But no, they showed that you can break things up into fractions and that you can break them up so much. And so numbers no longer seem to be the important thing they are. They hold for us here at the moment. But when we go out and when we get into further space, those numbers break up until we get to a number called infinity. Can anyone tell me how much infinity is? Yeah? Gee, you're a dumb lot today, aren't you? You can't answer one of my questions. No one's been able to tell me what the Trinity is. No one can explain quantum mathematics to me. And no one can explain a lot of these things. Oh, that's what it is. Well, afterwards, if you can explain the infinity, because I'm told that infinity, after reading the book on fractoid mathematics, is infinity plus 1 to infinity. And I feel so much wiser for that. But what I can understand is love. I know it when I see it. I know it when I feel it. And I know it when it's not there. The absence of love. In this very difficult and harsh world that we live in, and I believe it is harsh and getting harsher, the sadness when we turn on our television sets or listen to our radios at the inability of humanity to live with itself is astounding. And we don't have to look too far, do we? As I have a habit of turning on the television to watch the morning news, I don't know why, probably doesn't set me off in the greatest frame of mind, but there was at least 3 murders in Australia overnight. People dying, people being inconsiderate to one another in the worst possible ways. That was how news greeted me on this, the 22nd today. And I think, do we need a bit more love in this world? And what love brings? Because it's not just about the mathematics of believing a 3 in 1 and 1 in 3. Because quite frankly, for any logical mind, it doesn't make sense. And I will have to rest on the age-old theological argument every time you question it, just in saying it's a mystery. I don't understand it. And the mere fact that none of us understand what the Trinity truly is means that it is a mystery, a real mystery. But we do know about God of love. We do know about God in community. And we do understand a little bit that we have been called to live differently. And God, through God's Spirit in each one of us, allows that to happen. Wouldn't it be good if we went out not just thinking about the doctrine, if we get that far, but to actually go and think about the practice. And the praxis, that means the way of life, of living love with those outside. How we might make a difference this day for one other person or some other people. That seems to be the way of Jesus. That Jesus went and made a difference to the lives of people. Whenever Jesus was drawn into a dogmatic argument or one that was forcing him to support some kind of doctrine or dogma, he would be quite elusive in the way that he would treat it. We can recall different moments when Jesus, confronted by the scribes and the Pharisees, was set up with trick questions. And constantly, Jesus would come back with not a doctrinal answer, but an elusive answer, but one that was often inclusive of those who've been pushed to the margins of that community. Today, I will tell you about the Trinity. God is love. As we as a congregation sit here today, can we go out and love those around us? Sometimes it's hard enough to love those even within the church, isn't it? We struggle to do the most simple and the most basic of these things. A slightly overweight man on 2 very crooked legs today asks you to go out, to love those around, to make a difference to those that you come into contact with. Why? Because God loves us. God is one. God is one in purpose, in spirit, and a sense of outreach and love for those around. Today, let us go out this Trinity Sunday in the power of love. Amen.